You started off as a model and now seemingly sort of come full circle. What was that journey like for you?
I mean, for me, obviously being from Ladbroke Grove, sort of a very protective family, and then being thrown out into sort of the late 80s London as a teenage model. And I always say I sort of lived in two worlds. I lived in my home, which is, Ghanaian and Ghanaian foods and Ghanaian music, and then out in the world in England. So I feel this duality has sort of really defined who I am over the years. It was hard for my parents because, they wanted me to be a lawyer, an intellectual. It's been a very long journey, but I always wanted to include people of all races, all colours. I always call it, the marginalised or the other.
You've spoken in the past about your life growing up in Ladbroke Grove and sometimes being frightened in that environment because of who you were.
Yeah, I mean, growing up in sort of 80s Ladbroke Grove was a different time, We had to be sort of very careful, we had to be careful with the police, walking down the wrong street, things like knife crimes. I had a great role model. I had great uncles, I had my dad, and I had people to look up to. So, even when I went out and things weren't so great, I always had a great family.
But you grew up aware of racism?
Oh, of course. I think everybody who's black in England is aware of racism growing up. But for me, every challenge I faced, I would never sort of sit back and give up. I didn't come from that kind of family. I always thought, okay, I'll show you, I'll break through, and I'll do it with my work, and I'll do it with my talent. And so for me, that's really the continuous journey. Never saying, I couldn't do something. If you told me I couldn't do something, I'll definitely show you I could.
You've been quite frank in your experiences.
Yes.
You've tweeted about, being at a fashion show and not being sat on the front row with your peers. I mean, that was quite brave of you.
When you look at my work from the age of 18, I've always been very true to myself. I've always been very authentic about my feelings. In that particular case, when you walk into a show and all fashion directors are in the front row and you're in the second row, straight away that's you, profiling me. Even a few weeks ago, the same thing sort of happened.
The incident that you're referring to in the office, when you were racially profiled
Yes.
by a security guard in your own office, how did you feel when that happened?
It wasn't an isolated incident. Of course, it takes you back to all those moments in your life when that has happened. And I think people think that when you're successful, that things like that don't happen. For me, the beauty of that incident is it just makes me aware, never to think I'm too successful. That it can happen any day, and I have to be really alert and deal with it, really.
And what would you say to those that say, your success is an armour against racism and, things like that don't happen to people like you?
Well, obviously, as we saw the other day, it does happen from my tweets. It's important that something like this did happen because it reminds me never to think I'm, like I said, too successful or too well known or too established, because to somebody you're another black person. And I really didn't want all the young kids in the building to have to face that.
First black editor of British Vogue, first male editor of British Vogue. Lots of firsts in your armoury. Are you comfortable with being described as a pioneer?
Oh God, okay. Pioneer. I just like to think that I've contributed to the conversation. I've contributed to the world of fashion and imagery, and by doing that, I've been able to sort of shine a light on the marginalised groups. People who've been othered. That's really what I'm most proud of, making everybody a part of the conversation. And
are you happy to be described as political, that the magazine does have a statement to make now about current conditions?
I wouldn't say political, but I think I do use the platform to address injustices, to talk about, people's rights. So, like we said before, social rights, trans rights, the people we feature, Zadie Smith, Salman. we don't shy away from controversy. But on the other hand, it's all through a Vogue lens, to the highest quality. And as, you know, running alongside all that, we still have the incredible fashion stories, the incredible images, you know, designer profiles. For me and my team, who are sort of a diverse team, the mix is the most important for me.
Tell us about the September issue, the concept, the idea behind it, and what has materialised.
So the September issue is a very special one. We went from you know, COVID to talking about environmental issues to the biggest moment in civil rights history. I mean, the whole world, of the marches, and I felt like these incredible people who were sort of giving their time and their lives to make sure that there was social justice in the world, to make sure that there was education and community care. These were the people who were the new heroes.
And what we perhaps previously deemed as ordinary became extraordinary.
The ordinary is now so extraordinary. And that's what I love about what we're able to do at Vogue. You know, we've been able to pivot, still keep it Vogue, but talk about issues that really matter as well.
And the September issue, the front cover, tell us who's on the front cover, and also the collaborations behind the scenes as well.
Yes, I mean, the cover was shot by a photographer called Misan Harriman. He's a black photographer, styled by my fashion editor, Donna Wallace. And it was an all-black team. We have Marcus, you know, the footballer from Manchester. You know, I mean, he literally used his platform to get all the young kids fed. Then we have Adjoa Aboa. They're on sort of the main cover, you know, and Adjoa's used her platform to talk about mental health. For me, thinking, you know, as an editor for a fashion magazine, I knew I couldn't just have handbags and shoes. It just felt like we needed to create a document of this time, this incredible time of change.
Obviously, during the pandemic, we had the Black Lives Matter marches, and you actually went out on a march, didn't you?
I mean, you know, I live opposite Hyde Park, so I put my mask on, and I went, and you know, it was the most peaceful. You know, people sat on the floor, John Boyega spoke, and it was so peaceful. People of all colours and all races were there. And what really struck me about that day, about how, you know, that George Floyd's death hasn't been in vain, it brought everyone together.
Do you feel positive now that things might change, that the systemic racism that we've seen
I mean, I feel that
will
systemic
change?
racism, and I feel that people are aware now. You know, maybe perhaps, you know, it wasn't in people's faces, but now, you know, everybody knows racism is not just an American problem. You know, it's also a British problem. It's a global problem. And that's what these marches sort of, you know, showed everyone.
You did work with the Duchess of Sussex,
Yes.
that issue, the special issue that you did with her. She came in for a lot of criticism for that. Would you put that down to racism?
No, I mean, I think, you know, the Duchess of Sussex she's a brave woman. She's a brave woman. I feel that it wasn't, the parts of it probably racism, but it was more institution. You know, she walked into an institution and everybody expected her to know the rules. And I think sometimes it takes a minute to sort of understand the rules. But she did get a very unfair treatment, I thought.
Mm.
Yeah.
You feel that it was unfair, the way she was criticised?
It was harsh, it was harsh. But I wouldn't just blame it on racism.
Black Lives Matter, racism, people, how they've been perceived and how they've been judged in society. Are you hopeful now that there will be other Edward Enninfuls coming behind you, that people will feel that the doors have been opened?
Oh, I will make sure there is. For me, it's been so important just not being the only one, but always bringing people up with me. And I think it's so important, you know, the fashion industry needs to, you know, employ more people behind the scenes. Recruitment, you know, has to change. And I think once we have people behind the scenes, there'll be more than Edward Enninfuls, you know. But we need more people behind the scenes. I think it's not enough just having, you know, sort of black people on your Instagram feed or in a magazine. We've accomplished that. But now, you know, behind the scenes, that's when change really happens.
And is that the idea behind the September issue, having a full black cast contribute?
I mean, the September issue for me was really to talk about the times we were in now and the world we were in. So, you know, if that happens from that, I am so happy, really, and I hope it does.
Edward Enninful, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.